Dear listener, yes, spring is here. Spring has sprung, and that means it's time for you to check out the Politicrat Daily Podcast online store at the-politicrat.myshopify.com for the exclusive spring spectacular collection. It's got everything you want. T-shirts, sweatshirts, long t-shirts, mugs, pens, tote bags, and so much more. More merchandise being added on an almost daily basis. I think you'll really love what you see. Colors, bright and sharp, logos and designs, all available now and designed by yours truly, Omar Moore. So please, now that spring has sprung, check out the Spring Spectacular Collection at the Politicrat Daily Podcast online store. The address, the-politicrat.myshopify.com. Buy now. Thank you. Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Monday, April the 5th. 2021. On this edition of the Politicrat, a look at Israel and the trial of Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel, plus day number 6 of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. The prosecution, how do you think they are doing? And how do you think the defense is doing? That, and maybe a couple of other things, coming up next. One Shining Moment, Luther Vandross. That is a song that you're going to hear tonight. Tonight. If you are watching men's NCAA college basketball, Division I, the national championship game tonight, if you're watching that game at the end of the coverage on CBS Sports, you will be hearing that song. Believe me. So I just wanted to preview that before tonight, in case you don't watch the game. Maybe you're not a sports enthusiast. Maybe you're not someone that cares about sports at all. But there's always goosebumps when I hear that tune. Always goosebumps, because you have that song accompanied by the images of the hard-working athletes who hustle for every loose ball as the game is played, and it just shows you the grit, the determination of all of the athletes who play these games. And yesterday, the national championship was won on the women's side by Stanford. Wow. And only just. Stanford only barely survived. But sometimes that's what a championship game comes down to. Who will survive? It often is a survival match. Sometimes the team that ends up winning the whole kit and caboodle is the team that doesn't play very well, but does just enough at the end, does just that little bit more than the team that they defeat. And that's the story of life, isn't it? You only get out what you put in. Stanford Cardinal yesterday were not at their best, did not play their best game. I watched from start to finish, and I saw a team that really was rocking and reeling at times and could not put away their opponents, the Arizona team, who were very spirited, but just could not get that basket that would stamp their authority on the way they play. They were much more lively throughout the game than Stanford were. But it was Stanford who, when a stop was needed, it was Stanford who, when a basket was needed, it was Stanford who, when a turnover was needed, who absolutely came up with the goods. And so that's why you will be congratulating, or at least I congratulate, the Stanford Cardinal. Congratulations, Stanford, on your first national championship since 1992. That was the last time that the women's team won a national title. That's the last time a women's or men's team won a national title in basketball in the NCAA Division I. And Tara Vanderveer, has got to be given a lot of credit. A lot of credit. She was there coaching Stanford when they won almost 30 years ago, 29 years ago. So it tells you how long she's been at that program. There are lots of coaches who have been around for a long time. Another example is Jim Boeheim of the Syracuse Orangemen. And Jim Boeheim has been the head coach at Syracuse University since the 1980s. I mean, he's been there almost 40 years as a head coach. He was there before that. He was an assistant coach in the 1970s at Syracuse. So let's be honest, he's been really at Syracuse for at least 50 years. So, there you go, 50 years at Syracuse. That's more than half his life. He's not 100. But that is more than half of his life. So it's all about grit and hustle in these games. And tonight in the men's championship, it's Baylor against Gonzaga, the battle of number one seeds, the team that has not yet lost this season in Gonzaga, taking on a team that has by far, in my view, been the most impressive team in this particular tournament. That is Baylor from out of Texas. So you've got Texas against Washington State, essentially, in this one tonight. So if you are watching, make sure you do watch. And I hope you do have a good championship game tonight, because if, as I said yesterday, if the game tonight isn't anything like what we saw in that second game of the Final Four on Saturday night between Gonzaga and UCLA, we are in for a real treat tonight. We'll see. This should be a good one. 2 number one seeds. It's not too often that we get 2 number one seeds playing for a national title, whether it's the men's or women's game. But we're going to have that tonight on the men's side for the national title. Stanford won in the women's title for the national title yesterday. Who will win on the men's side tonight? Well, we'll see. Will Gonzaga stay undefeated for the season and become only, I guess, the second ever team to go through an entire season undefeated? Indiana was the other one back in the 1970s, the Hoosiers. Or will it be Baylor winning the national title for them? They've not won the national title, I think, in a long, long time on the men's side, if ever. So, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but this will be a very good game tonight regardless. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about tonight. I do occasionally talk about sports, as you know, on this podcast. So, and if you listen to the trailer of this podcast, I do mention that sports is part of it. So now and again, I will talk about sports. And this time of year where there's a lot of sport going on, you will hear a lot more of it from me. So thank you for bearing with me, those of you who do not care a lick about sports. Now, back to the politics and the news. And before I get into the central theme here today, which is going to be focused twofold, one on the trial that is ongoing, as day 6 arrived today and is ongoing in the Derek Chauvin murder trial, and also split with what I've been talking about the last day or so with what's going on in the UK. Really a real issue there with this bill that just is part of this continuing rightward lurch in the United Kingdom, particularly England, as this bill, which is really essentially outlawing protest in the countries of England and Wales, would cause tremendous damage. It really would. And any notion or any semblance of democracy, which is already heavily contested and rightfully and understandably so, would just be put to the sword with this bill, which, if it becomes law, will absolutely create what I would say would be a totalitarian state in England and Wales. But first, I want to just talk about a few things really quickly. One of them is that right now in Israel, there is a trial going on, a corruption trial going on involving the present Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who, is involved in a corruption trial. And he is on trial. He's been indicted for at least, I think, on 3 different charges at least. And he has, I just think this guy's got to resign. I think he has to resign. He and Benny Gantz of the Blue and White Party had a power-sharing agreement when Benny Gantz, I guess, narrowly won the election last time around. And my goodness, they've had so many elections in Israel over the last, 3 or 4 years. You've lost count. It'll make your head spin. It seems like they have an election every other month in Israel. Seriously, they go to the polls, talk for presidential, or I should say prime ministerial elections. It seems like every other month. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit. But they do. They go. There's been at least 3 elections in the last year and a half, 2 years. Something like that. If not more recent, more frequent. But Netanyahu has been in and around power in Israel now for a long time. A long time. Since the late 1990s. This guy has either been the prime minister or has been hovering around the premiership over the last 25 to 30 years. And he is not well liked by a lot of people in Israel. There are a lot of Israelis who do not like Benjamin Netanyahu. And the way that the news media, the corporate news media in the US covers Netanyahu, it's as if he's beloved by people in Israel. They'll show you a few choice shots and videos of some people supporting him, but they rarely, if ever, go to the people in the country of Israel who absolutely despise him. Plenty of Israelis don't like Netanyahu. And sure, of course, there are Israelis who do love him, who like him, who love him. But the general public in Israel, by and large, are not big fans of his. So the Associated Press released a story today and talked about Netanyahu and some of these charges. And that he had apparently been accused in this, there's been at least, there's been charges in a lot of things. He's got 3 cases he's dealing with. Fraud, breach of trust, accepting bribes. And it's a parade of people testifying against him. One after the other, after the other, after the other. A lot of corruption in this case that he is accused of. All of these charges, and breach of trust and bribe acceptance, and he's accused of promoting, among the charges, accused of promoting regulations that ended up delivering hundreds of millions of dollars of profits to a telecom company in exchange for positive coverage from this telecom company's news site. So the charges are that Netanyahu pushed for regulations that gave this telecom company in Israel a boatload of profits because the regulations were eased, allegedly. And the millions upon hundreds of millions of dollars in profits went to this telecom company, allegedly, in exchange for that company's news site doing positive coverage of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's one of the big charges that he is charged with. And really, he should really be out of office. I mean, it's incredible this guy is still hanging on to power when he shouldn't be. And this reads like the previous occupant of the White House, pressuring people, pressuring media to write positive articles about him and unfavorable ones about his political rivals. I mean, talk about putting your thumb on a scale. There's just no way that this guy should even be sitting in office. Most of the lawmakers in Israel are against Netanyahu getting another term in office. And that just does not sit well with him staying in power. He just can't. The Knesset, which is the parliamentary body in Israel, don't recognize him. I mean, they recognize him, but he doesn't have a snowball's chance. He doesn't have any kind of majority in the Knesset. And because he doesn't have a majority in the Knesset, his position as prime minister is untenable. And so because his position is untenable, there's no reason, as he's going to this phase of his trial, that he should even be in office anymore. And what you've seen, I think, if you followed Netanyahu over the last few years, what you've seen with these elections has been a man just desperately clinging to power. This whole power sharing thing with Benny Gantz, the first 18 months or so, Netanyahu held the office and he's still in the office. And in the next 18 months or so, Benny Gantz is supposed to hold the office. That was their agreement. Now, whether or not that continues or not is quite another story. And it's not that Benny Gantz is some kind of polar opposite to Benjamin Netanyahu. Benny Gantz holds positions that are quite similar, if not more extreme in some ways than Benjamin Netanyahu. But we'll see what happens, because I don't think that Netanyahu can stay in power. I don't think there's any way he can stay in power now. This trial is certainly not going to give him any political strength. And he's had quite enough of that, in my view. Thank you very much. Benjamin Netanyahu has spent a lot of time being unpopular, saying racist things, saying infamously racist things. I mean, openly so. Yet last year, the year before, he was saying some really disgusting things. This guy's a war hawk. He's a warmonger. The guy is nothing but a killer. I mean, this guy has ordered so many strikes against Palestinians, destroyed their land, destroyed their homes. He's not popular in his own country. The Palestinians hate his guts, which you can completely understand. And the Knesset does not have a majority for him. So he is politically out of step with the reality of even his own party and the Knesset. And it's time for him to go. Netanyahu really, I think now, is a broken record. He can deny all the charges he wants in this case. This guy's got to go. I mean, it was the fourth election in 2 years. I said, didn't I say 2 and 3 years or something? Or whatever I said. This is their fourth election in 2 years in Israel. 4 elections. And the most recent one was just a couple of weeks ago. And it was it ended as a pretty much even Steven. This plurality that you've got going on in governments is happening all over the place because there's this grinding of the gears to slow everything down, and all this kind of stuff results in the kinds of things that give rise to dictatorships. When you have all this deadlock, whether it's here in the United States, whether it's in other different kinds of countries all around the world, or in Israel or anywhere else, and there's this deadlock, that gives an opening to some kind of group that is undemocratic, even though the system itself is undemocratic already. It's already given space for someone who is undemocratic to come in and be a tyrant. And I just think this is ridiculous. Netanyahu must go. And of course, he doesn't have the humility to resign. And by the way, he's not required to resign. You would have thought by now that someone who's on trial and has been on trial for a number of months and has made appearances after appearance, you would have thought that that would have prompted some humility from him or anyone. But when it comes to power, there is no humility. Welcome back. And I hope you did enjoy your Easter Sunday. Those of you who celebrate Easter or observe it on the Christian calendar. If you are one of those who does, I hope you enjoyed your Easter Sunday. And I hope that you are enjoying Monday here as we get into day number 6 of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. And what we're seeing now is the prosecution looking at use of force. That's the key pivot point for them now. Not pivot point, maybe not the best word to use, but the focus of the prosecution is to further establish that what Derek Chauvin did was well beyond the bounds of police guidelines. Obviously, what he did is not beyond the bounds of police behavior because police do this all the time to black people. We just happen to see it recorded on someone's cell phone video. There's all kinds of things that police do to black people that you and I have no idea of. We have not seen the video for those. So if you saw the video for this particular torture and execution, you best believe that there are others out there that have happened that you just have not seen or that just were not recorded via video at all, but that did take place. Think about that for a second. If you saw this video, which everyone around the world has, knowing that this exists, think of all of the similar situations that also exist in the United States that do not have people present to record them on their cell phones. So for every one of these executions of a black person that you do get to see because someone was there to record it, think about how many dozens, how many hundreds, how many thousands of executions, tortures, beatings, or any other kind of violence by police against black people happens in the country, the US of A. But you just don't see them. Think about how many thousands of others happen that you don't ever see. So use of force, by the way, is what is the next point that the prosecution is trying to prove, is that this use of force was wildly disproportional, which it obviously was. Wildly disproportional and widely disproportionate to anything that George Floyd was doing. In fact, the only thing George Floyd was doing was crying out for his mother, face down into the concrete. That's what he was doing, with handcuffs behind his back. He was handcuffed, calling for his mother, telling everybody, tell my kids I love them. Oh, use of force. I think it's pretty darn clear that if someone's lying face down in the concrete, their hands handcuffed behind their back, with two other police officers holding down their legs and their thighs or their ankles, while a third officer is sitting for nearly 10 minutes with his knee embedded into the carotid artery of the neck of George Floyd, and a fourth officer standing there like an executioner with a bag over his head and his arms folded. I think it's fair to say that what Derek Chauvin did is wildly disproportionate to what you would expect if a white person was in that position. Hear what I did there? I didn't say what a person would be in that position. I said what a white person in that position would be doing, what would be happening to them. Yeah, you heard that. It was deliberate why I said it like that. Because a white person wouldn't have been in that position to begin with. Derek Chauvin would not have sat on a white person for 10 minutes. Almost 10 minutes. Handcuffed behind their back. Come on. Everybody knows that. Everybody listening knows that. And so in one way, it's crude, isn't it, dear listener? For us to be having this discussion about, use of force and it's pretty darn clear to the world that Derek Chauvin executed George Floyd and obviously was behaving in a way that was completely unjustified. Anybody who continues to keep his knee in the neck of a dead man while the paramedics are still there checking his pulse while the guy still got a knee in his neck and the guy's been dead. Anybody who still has a knee in the neck at that point, we all know that that's way beyond what anybody should be doing. So I kind of look at this prosecution establishing that the use of force was wildly disproportionate as, I hate to say a joke, but yeah, it's obvious, isn't it? But you and I both know it's obvious. But as I've said before, it's the jury. It's those 12 people that we have no idea what's running through their mind. We have no idea what's running through their brains. We don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how they've been deliberating so far, or rather, if they have been talking to each other. Because they're not supposed to talk about the case until they deliberate on it. They can take notes. They can, doodle. They can write out their ABCs. They can write out the numbers 1 through 200 and then write them backwards from 200 down to 1. They can do anything in that jury room, in that jury box. They can take notes. They can sketch. They can do whatever the hell they want. But they can't discuss the case amongst themselves until they go to the deliberation room to deliberate. That's how it works. I remember when I was sitting on a jury, I was, the charge to us by the judge. The judge said, do not talk about this case amongst yourselves. Do not deliberate. Do not discuss the case. Do not read the newspapers. Do not watch the news. And we'll see you back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And that's how it went. And at least in the times I was with fellow jurors, we didn't talk about any of the case. I can't account for everyone else. But when it came to the deliberation, we talked. It was a very lively situation. It really was. It was a criminal case. It was a murder case. New York. And when we had our 12 angry men, and we went from 3 people thinking that the guy on trial was guilty as sin, and he was part of a group that he had walked away from, who had witnessed the murder, and he walked away from that group, and the prosecutor was trying to nail him for a murder rap, even though he had left the group, who ended up staying behind and watching under the acting in concert law in New York. The guy on trial, he left the group to go home. And this prosecutor in New York was trying to nail this guy with a murder rap, the guy that left the group, trying to attenuate the acting in concert law to him. Even though he left the group, he said, no, I'm sorry, I'm going home. And he left. And myself and a few others, 2 or 3 others, we dug in our heels and said, look, this guy has nothing to do with this killing. It was horrible that someone lost their life, but this guy had nothing to do with it. He clearly left the scene. And we worked on these people. We got a few more people, and then we presented some evidence. We ran videotapes that were shown to us. And by the time the next day came, because we were sequestered in a hotel, and by the time people slept on it, we had deliberated for a few hours, and then we slept on it, woke up the next day, polled everybody. Everybody said, he's innocent. He couldn't have done this. He had no attenuation to it. He walked away. That was the end of anything he had to do with it. He didn't know a murder was going to take place. Now, that's, of course, not a requirement about whether you know or not. I mean, you may not know that there's drugs in someone's car, right? You may not know that you get into a cab and the cab driver drives off, right? And then the cab is stopped. And there happens to be drugs in the car underneath the seat you're sitting in. In some states, in many states, you're charged with that crime. Even if he is a cab driver, or her, or they. Certainly if you're in a regular vehicle, you're in a ride share. You're on your way to work. If you are still fortunate enough to be going to work in an office. Not that you'd want to be in an office, especially now with these variants flying around and with your CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, telling you that she is scared to death of the ramifications of people flinging off their masks in unbridled joy because they've had their 2 vaccinations. And you could be driving in a ride share, as so many people do here in California. I don't know if they're doing that right now, though, but still, here's my hypothetical. You're in a ride share. You get into a vehicle, car share, ride share, whatever, and you're driving. Police stop you on the highway, California Highway Patrol, not John and not Poncherello, a.k.a. Larry Wilcox and Eric Estrada. They're not stopping you, but some other person from the CHP is stopping you on the highway. Turns out there's drugs in the car. They search the car, they find drugs. Oops, you and the two other people are charged with constructive possession of narcotics. And then you get to go on trial if there isn't a plea deal. 96, 97% of all criminal cases are plea deals. That's true. Most criminal cases never get to a courtroom. They are pled out. There's a plea deal done. There's some kind of agreement. There is a compromise. There may be a suspended sentence. There's an agreement. So then there's a sentence of whatever to avoid going to trial, because on trial you roll the dice. You never know what kind of jury you're going to get, blah, blah, blah. And so you say, okay, well, I'm going to plead out for some sentence, even if I didn't do it. Now, the exonerated 5 didn't do that because they all knew they were innocent, and they were innocent. We all knew. Well, I knew that. I felt that very strongly at the time. A lot of people did not. No, I'm not trying to give myself a pat on the back. But the exonerated 5 in Central Park in New York, when they were kids, when they were boys, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old boys, they refused to do plea deals because they all were not guilty in the first place. And then prosecutors used that against them, put them on trial, got these coerced and forced videotapes out of them that the police intimidated and beat them up to get so-called confessions from. And that's when they got thrown in prison for a crime they didn't commit. What else is new, right? Black folk getting thrown in prison for something they didn't do. And then, again, most of the cases do not see a courtroom. They don't. They never see the daylight of a courtroom or the inside of a courtroom. They are pled out. 97% or so of them are, if not a bit more or a bit less. And the fact of the matter is that now you're on trial for constructive possession, even though you didn't know yet there were drugs in the vehicle. It's not your vehicle. It's a stranger's car, which is another advertisement for why you don't get into a car that you don't know the occupant of. Never ride with strangers. I remember that as a kid in England. Oh, gosh. Never go with strangers. Those public service videos were scary as hell way back then. Oh, my God. But this whole thing, this whole use of force thing, I think the prosecution is just trying to explain to the jury that it's not just about this videotape. It's about this guy repeatedly violating police procedure. Now, my thing is, can we also introduce, and I don't know this, dear listener, maybe you do. Can we also have the record of Derek Chauvin put on trial? Can we? Can we have exhibits showing the 18 or 19 complaints against him in his 17 or 18 years on the force? That he was a violent cop, that he beat people up, that he had actually shot and I believe killed someone previously, a Latino gentleman, I believe it was, or a black person. Either a black gentleman or a Latino gentleman. He killed. Shot and killed. This is the same Derek Chauvin on trial for executing George Floyd. He had previously killed somebody. Believe it was a Latino man. A few years ago. Nothing. He didn't suffer any ramifications for that. Can we have that put in court? I mean, yes, the use of force thing is fine to establish that this guy obviously acted beyond. It's obvious that he did. What the jury may not know is that this guy has a track record of doing this, which is why I think you didn't have any resistance to him when those cops stood there and watched what was going on. He was known to them, I bet you, as a rogue. Well, should we even call him a rogue cop when this happens all the time, all over the country? But he was known as a cop who did this. This was not his first rodeo, in other words. Derek Chauvin. This wasn't his first rodeo doing these kinds of violent, heinous, cowardly, torturous things to people. It was not his first rodeo. His record was well known to the Minneapolis Police Department. Well known. And they kept him on the force. Kept him on the force. This is not the first time. Someone who does that and sits on the neck of another human being with his knee for nearly 10 minutes, that is not the first time they've done something like that. And that is not the first time that they have killed or brutally beaten or tortured somebody. It's not the first time. And I'm telling you, those cops knew it. They knew it. I bet you word went around that precinct, word went around that department about this cop. And there may have been cops that didn't like it but continued to go along with it. There may have been cops that says, screw that, I'm staying away from him. There may have been cops that said, right on, brother, and cheerled him and were happy that he was doing the things he was doing. I don't know. But the fact that he was allowed and was allowed up until last year to stay on the force with all of these complaints against him, and only 2 of them where he got basically a wrist slap in both, tells you something not only about the police officers that worked with him or heard of him, but the whole culture of the Minneapolis PD and the system itself. And you're telling me that they didn't all know about this guy, but they kept him on the force. They didn't get rid of him until after he was caught and recorded on video doing what he did. And then the system says, well, it's unintentional murder. Guy in hands in his pockets, shades on his head or whatever, looking at the camera. Here, hi, Mom. Asking George Floyd, what do you want? I mean, that's certainly unintentional. Knee still in his neck when he's dead. This guy got off on doing this. There's no question in my mind that Derek Chauvin is that kind of evil piece of garbage. He probably got off on it. He probably did. I think it was pretty obvious that he did. I mean, you heard people, if you watched that video, I'm sure you did, saying, look, man, he's enjoying this. It was Donald Williams' voice, actually, who so far is still the best witness the prosecution has had in this case to date. Still the best witness. And you can hear him saying, yo, look at that, man. Like he's enjoying that, man. You're a bum, man. You're enjoying it, man. You're a bum. You're a bum, bro. You heard it. You hear it on that tape over and over. He's saying he's enjoying it. And I think he was. I'm telling you, there are a lot of people that get off on stuff like this. And especially when it's a black person being brutalized like this. There are a lot of people, particularly, I think, a segment of the white population that really gets turned on by shit like this. I'm telling you, it's deep and it's evil and it's disgusting and it's heinous and it's true. I think that there are a cross section, I'm not going to say how many percentage points, but there is a segment of white society, however big or small that might be, that I think gets totally turned on by violence against black people. They get turned on by black pain, this fetishizing of black death in this culture that we live in and swim in. I'm telling you, that happens. I mean, look at boxing. I get it. They're white boxers. There's all kinds of other boxers who box in the ring. But you see all of those people at ringside, some of them are black too, who are watching these 2 black guys in the boxing ring bashing each other to bits, to smithereens, blood flying into the audience. Oh, woo! I'm turned on by that. That's what I think some of these folks are thinking. And it's you got these women sitting in there, men too. I know this is certainly sexist. You've got these women sitting around close to the ring and they're ooh and ah. It's like they're getting turned on by this. Some of them, I think. And these men are too. Turned on. Ooh. Oh, these two black brutes. They're going at each other. And it's turning me on. That's the thinking. I believe I could be well out of line and wrong. I could be wrong. But I don't think I am. They love this. They love to see us fighting each other, punching each other. And I do think there's a segment of white society that sits around that ringside, and they get turned on by this. And even in general, I think there are people that get turned on by violence. This is a very violent culture. And we obviously, not we, you and me, but this culture puts violence first. It puts violence before love. It prioritizes violence over love. Yeah, but that's just not even... That's a fact. If it bleeds, it leads in the news. Headlines with violent allusions. Photographs of corpses. News reports on TV. You don't see them showing images of people kissing and hugging each other and making love, having sex. You don't see those images on your front page. You see the violent, bloody ones. We should really have a culture that actually is invested in love, so that we have newspaper headlines that actually have loving things on the front of them, even in a cruel and harsh world as this one is. We need to make love the center again. And whether this trial results in a guilty verdict or not, and you know where I stand on this when it comes to the outcome of this trial regarding Derek Chauvin. And the fact that they really should have all of his record on trial if they haven't. Put his record on trial, not George Floyd's drug use. What's George Floyd's drug use got to do with a knee in his neck for 9.5 minutes with him handcuffed behind his back on the floor, on the road, face down? What the hell does his drug use got to do with that? What's that going to do with it? Why don't you ask if Derek Chauvin was using drugs? See, damn it. Why don't this prosecution, you know how I feel about him? I've said this many a time to you, dear listener, and you know what I've said. I want, if there hasn't already been, introduction to the court of what Derek Chauvin was using. And someone might tell me, well, what's that got to do with anything? He killed somebody. Well, the only thing that's got to do with anything, to those who may say such a thing, is that this guy's on trial. This guy is on trial. And you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a strong standard in criminal law. That is not a beyond a preponderance or by a preponderance of the evidence standard, because by a preponderance of evidence is a civil standard for civil lawsuits, civil cases. By a preponderance of the evidence. That means 50.1%. likely that this thing happened, and therefore you're going to have to pay out damages, punitive damages, compensatory damages, intentional infliction of emotional, distress damages, or whatever damages that are applicable in those kinds of cases. But in a criminal case in the United States, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a much, much higher bar to reach. And for obvious reasons. And so, with the fact that there are jurors who I think on this jury, I have no idea, it's just my guess, who I think are looking for a reason to acquit this thug, Derek Chauvin, this murderer, Derek Chauvin. You have to, as a prosecutor, present your case full throttle. Get the attention of this jury from the jump. Get their attention. And if you've been watching this trial, dear listener, can you say that this prosecution has got your attention from the jump? Do you really think that they have had this earth-shattering case that they've presented in the 6 days, and this is day number 6, that you have seen thus far, these first 6 days? Can you point to any moments where you said, yeah, that's a great prosecution? Wow. I'm not talking about the evidence of the videotape. Of course, that's the strongest thing the prosecution has. Of course. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about without that videotape, which is so powerful and just shows you that he murdered, Derek Chauvin murdered Mr. Floyd. Without that piece of evidence, is there anything about the prosecution's case in these 6 days of trial that you've sat back and said, wow, damn, that was good? From the lawyers, I'm talking about from these attorneys. And I want you to be really honest with yourself when you think about and answer that question for yourself. Because you know how I think about this and what my outlook is. I think these people are speaking as if they are in a mock trial. And I'm sorry, with someone's life being so brutally taken like this, you've got to have some passion. I get it, everybody's style is different when they're prosecuting or when they're a defense attorney. But you have got to be tougher. And I talked about this the other day. I'm not going to rehash that all over again. You can go back a few days ago where I talked about how prosecutors in other cases where there was less evidence, in fact, where it was outright lies, how much more passionate they were than this lot are in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, in Hennepin County specifically, in that courthouse. They have been really poor. Their comportment is poor. Only one of them is referring to Derek Chauvin consistently as, quote, the defendant. Steve Schleicher, by the way, is the name of that prosecutor who is the only one who is consistently calling him that. Because that's what Derek Chauvin is. He's a defendant. He's a murderer too. But he's a defendant for the sake of the court and himself in a criminal trial of murder. Unintentional. But he's the only one. Steve Schleicher is the only prosecutor of the bunch who is referring to Derek Chauvin, consistently referring to him as the defendant. And that is not good enough. It's not good enough. Ask yourself, dear listener, if you think this prosecution, and I get it, it's early doors. It's early days, early doors. We've just gone in, we're in the 6th day of the trial. This thing's supposed to go for another 2 to 3 weeks. We are not going to get a verdict in this case probably until sometime in May. Before Memorial Day for sure, but sometime in May. So anything can still happen. Prosecution could fumble the case. Defense could just completely tread all over itself. The defense could pull a rabbit out of a hat. And the thing is, as the longer this thing goes on, I don't think, as much as I hate to say it, I don't think Nelson's hurting himself. I'm going to stop calling him half Nelson, because what he's doing right now is doing exactly what a defendant would want his or her or their attorney to do. Just poke holes in a couple of things. Just entertain. Leave the jury with a mere whiff of a possibility. Poke a hole in a theory or in a presentation. Tell the jury, well, the time on that video, how do you know that's the time it happened? What were the lighting conditions? Isn't it true that there have been situations where someone's handcuffed and they've tried to wrestle? You and I may think that last question that I just posed is an absurd one. But you and I do not know for a fact that there isn't a juror on that jury in that Hennepin County courtroom who hasn't thought or isn't thinking right now, well, maybe that's why he had him handcuffed. Maybe that's why he was handcuffed. You don't know that. I don't know that. We don't know that. And all it is of the job of the defense attorney to do, in this or in any other case that is a criminal case, is to plant a seed of doubt. That standard beyond a reasonable doubt is a very difficult one in a lot of criminal cases. I don't think it is in this case, but I don't know what those 12 jurors think. And they're the ones that count. Not me, not you, not us. Our opinion means nothing to anybody except us, the court of public opinion. But it means nothing. It means diddly squat to those jurors. They're the ones in charge. And that's my concern. I don't know where these jurors are going to go. I have no idea, nor do you. And that's what makes this a scary proposition. Because as much as we've seen this video, as much as we've seen these testifiers, these witnesses, some of whom have been good, I think that, again, Donald Williams to me is the best witness still. Genevieve Hanson was a good witness. Courtney Ross was a good witness, obviously, as the girlfriend of George Floyd. I think she was good. And there's been the Minnesota police officer, the longtime police officer who is no longer a police officer, but he's still on the force in Minneapolis, saying, no, this is completely beyond the guidelines. Completely beyond. Good witness. That was Richard Zimmerman on Friday. He was a good witness as well. So there's been about 3 witnesses, 3 or 4. If I had to rank them, Donald Williams, I think is very good. Richard Zimmerman was very good. The other one I didn't mention was Charles McMillan. I thought he was compelling. And I think that Courtney Ross was. And then I'd put Genevieve Hanson in 5th place, if you will. If I had to grade these prosecution attorneys, I would not grade them very highly. I think Steve Schleicher is probably the only one, like I say, because he continues to refer to Derek Chauvin as the defendant, which is what Chauvin is. But there's too much of this, let me rephrase, that's a long-winded question, it's vague. A jury's sitting there for hours and hours, and if they keep hearing you say, let me rephrase, oh, I'm sorry, the question needs to be a little bit clearer, let me re-ask it, they're going to begin to think that you don't know what you're doing with your case. That alone is enough reasonable doubt for a juror to say, sod it, sod it. They don't know what they're doing with their case, sod it. I'm going to just say, you know what? I'm looking at them and I'm looking at Eric Nelson, and Eric Nelson at least seems to know what the hell he's talking about. He hasn't stumbled and flaffed about on his questions. He knows what he's talking about, and he seems like someone I'd believe. I don't like what happened here. I think he did it, but I don't think the prosecution's done enough. And that's what it comes down to in many juries, I'm telling you. They look at how the people present their case, even with a video. Okay, I know people don't like to hear this kind of thing because, oh, you're being negative, oh, you're being this, oh, you're being pessimistic, oh my God, you're a killjoy. This is what people think, some people. All I'm saying here is that this is something to keep your eye on and to be cognizant of. And I think people know that listening to what I'm saying. Anything's possible. But you never know in these cases. You never, ever know. And given 400 years of history in this country, come on now. Am I being pessimistic? Or am I being realistic based on 400 years of a long history of cops and white people in general getting no jail time at all for doing this and worse, and not even getting indicted in many cases, even having any metal strapped around their necks, around their wrists, in the way of handcuffs. Yeah, George Floyd had handcuffs around his wrists. Did Derek Chauvin even have any around his for what he did? I'll come back on another occasion to talk about the crime bill in England and Wales that is causing a lot of problems, and well understood that they would be causing problems, that bill. I'll do that in another episode, but I really wanted to leave. I think it would be best to leave it right here. Please subscribe to the newsletter. Become a paying subscriber to the Politicrat Daily Podcast newsletter, of which there will be one following this episode. So stay tuned for it, but you can only see it if you pay. $30 a year is all it takes. $5 a month or $30 a year, which works out to be cheaper by 50%. So please pay now at politicrat.substack.com. That's politicrat.substack.com. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.